At WellFed Photography, the word client is becoming a thing of the past. We are now happily welcoming members to enjoy having their family histories captured so that they can have gorgeous pieces of family art to look back on and treasure in this lifetime and by future generations. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a member, you can visit our website at wellfedphotography.com/membership or download our membership brochure in the link provided. Now, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi, everyone. Ariana here from WellFed Photography, and I'm so delighted to have Pamela Quiery back with us from Hand in Hand Parenting. Pamela was our very first episode of Living a Life Well Fed, and I encourage you to go back and watch that episode as well, as it lays some of the foundations that we will work from today. But I know Pamela will do an excellent job of recapping those as well. Pamela, would you want to just let our audience know a bit about yourself and what you do with Hand in Hand Parenting?
Yeah. And thank you, first of all, Ariana. Thank you for having me back. It's so exciting. I loved our conversation the last time. So whenever you asked me back, I was like, yes, I jumped at it. So
I loved it too. It was so good.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I am based in Belfast. I'm a mum of two children. My daughter is 9.5 and my son is 5.5. So, and I discovered hand in hand parenting when my son was just newborn and my daughter was about 4 years old. And it's, I've been on such a journey with my own parenting, since I became a mum. But really, when I discovered hand in hand parenting, something really clicked with me. It really resonated with me. I started using the tools, which we'll talk about probably in a bit. And I started using the tools every day in my parenting, and I just got deeper and deeper into it. I just loved it so much that I decided in 2018 to do the instructor training course. So now I am a certified hand-in-hand parenting instructor. And there's a few of us in the island of Ireland. There's 3 of us now, I think. So I have been doing that for the last. I suppose just before COVID came along, I got certified. So I've been working throughout the pandemic, doing my parenting classes and working one-to-one with people as well.
I feel like it's probably never been so needed before, like a lot of parents navigating issues that maybe they didn't have to face before and being home with their children and also juggling work. So I'm sure you have been a huge blessing to lots of parents during this time.
Yeah.
And today, I think we're talking about a really important subject that I personally don't see brought to the forefront enough or very often. And that is the topic of children's anger and aggression, both in play, being the bad guy, and also through, being in the moment and the challenges that come with everyday life. So Pam, I don't know if you want to talk about the play side of things first, or if you want to talk about everyday responses, but I'm happy to take your lead in that regard.
Yeah, so I think that's really good that you've made that distinction as well between when we think about anger or, aggression, that, sometimes our kids are very much playing, they're playing, and they can have that kind of very sort of aggressive or exuberant play, or they can be playing with guns or be playing with like subjects that are kind of tricky for us maybe. And then there's also when our children have outbursts and when they have these very aggressive outbursts as well. So there's a real difference, and I'll talk about the difference between those. But I think a really good place to start is maybe just it's such a key component of hand-in-hand parenting, is maybe just talking about the core beliefs behind hand-in-hand parenting, because everything else sort of flows from that. So, and I can't remember, I'm sure I definitely would have talked about this in the last episode, but I think it's really important to talk about it again, is that hand-in-hand parenting is very much a connection-based parenting model, or parenting approach. So, in a lot of mainstream parenting is kind of behavioral approached or control-based or coercion-based parenting. With that type of parenting, what people are trying to do is trying to control children's behavior, often through punishments and rewards. There is an underlying belief that we need to teach our children right from wrong. And, so if they're doing wrong, we must punish them. And if they're doing right, we must reward that so they know it's right. So that is very much the mainstream view on parenting. But in hand-in-hand parenting, it's quite different in that it's very much connection-based. And what what our approach is that we believe that children they are inherently good. I don't even like using good and bad. That children are very much they know they want to be cooperative. They want to be loving. They really want to please us and to do what we ask them to do. They want to be part of the family. They want to be they want to be with us. And what happens is that whenever their brain is working well and whenever they feel connected to a caregiver, then they do behave well. And we see that in our children. Those days when their sunny little selves come out and they're happy and they'll do anything. It's like, oh, do you want to clear your plate? Yes, mummy, of course. And it's everything is great. But often what happens is very, very often our children lose that sense of connection with us. And when they lose the sense of connection with us, their thinking brain, at the front here, the prefrontal cortex, their thinking brain stops working. It goes offline, and that's where they have their impulse control and their good judgment and their thinking, their short-term memory. That's all here in the prefrontal cortex. When they lose the sense of connection, that goes offline. And then we don't call it bad behavior, we call it off-track behavior, because when they can't think, their behavior goes off track. And that's all those behaviors that we see that are not pleasing us, that we are trying to manage. But if we can restore that sense of connection with our children, then the thinking will come back online again, and they will become cooperative and loving and kind and all of those things again. So that's the real key understanding behind hand-in-hand parenting. And then from that flows the 5 tools that we use, which I can get into in a minute. But the 5 tools are all about building connection, about reconnecting with our children, and also helping them offload any yucky feelings that are stopping them from feeling our connection with them. I wonder, should we talk first about, when our children have these very angry outbursts, and then maybe afterwards we can talk about play. So I suppose when our children, from a hand-in-hand perspective, when our children are angry, first of all, I suppose just to acknowledge that it's really, really common. It's really common. So I think we often feel very isolated as parents, that we think, oh my God, my child is trying to punch me in the face. They're kicking me. What have I done wrong as a parent? Everybody else's kids seem to be fine. And, behind closed doors, I think many parents struggle with aggression in their children. And it's very, very common and very, very normal. And often it's hard for us as parents to manage that, because, anger wasn't maybe approved of, or not approved of, but it wasn't held very well when we were children ourselves. It was often met with probably harshness or punishment or shaming, and these kind of things that, that kind of behavior wasn't acceptable for many of us when we were children. And and so then whenever our children sort of act out with these big feelings coming out, it triggers a big reaction in us, of sometimes of panic, of overwhelm, of frustration, of anger in ourselves, of rage in ourselves, of us feeling inadequate. There's a full range of emotions that can come up in us whenever our children are angry. And it's very hard. We don't have a culture that understands anger very well, or that acknowledges it, or knows what to do with it. So it's very difficult for us as parents when we don't have that template to work from ourselves. And we're often trying to do things differently. We're trying to parent our children in a gentle way, and trying to really accept the full range of emotions. And that's really hard to do when we haven't done it ourselves.
Absolutely. I feel like so many people are trying to parent in a way that's different than what they experienced. But our generation didn't necessarily have models to look to on how to do this. And so now we're finding ourselves triggered at these big emotions that we want to embrace, and we want our children to know that it's okay to express. And yet we just don't always have the tools to know what to do in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember with my own daughter, when I started out as a mom, I was like, yeah, I am okay with all the emotions. All the emotions are good. And then it took me a long time to even notice or realize that I was not okay, yeah, I was okay probably with sadness. If she hurt her knee and was crying, I was like, I'm fine with that. But when it came to anger, when it came to her saying no and like throwing things at me and all this, I was not okay with that. And I just didn't know how to handle that at all. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I saw a post recently and it was saying that whenever you're feeling unheard as a parent, it's kind of this flashback almost to whenever we were children and did not feel heard. And now that's happening for us again, even though that's not what our children mean by it, but that's sort of what we're reliving in a sense when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have all these little emotional hurts stored away. It's like a little filing cabinet in our limbic brain, of all these times when things were hard for us as children, and we're in such close relationship with our own children that they remind us of those times that were hard, and they trigger those emotional memories, and we get flooded with them. And an example of that would be, if it's a really good thing to think yourself, to reflect on what would have happened. Think of that behavior that your child really gets you, like that, whether it's throwing or kicking or trying to push you, or whatever it is that they do that really provokes a reaction in you. It's really good to think, like, what would have happened if I had behaved like that when I was a child? Like, what would my parents' reactions have been? And like, for many people, it's like, I wouldn't have dared behave like that. So, and that's for a reason. Like, why wouldn't we have dared to behave like that as a child? Because it would have been how our parents would have reacted. They wouldn't have tolerated it. And I think a lot of parents now are more open to, they're more tolerant of these behaviors. So children do express them, and it's really normal to express them. But then it reminds them of the times that they couldn't express those big feelings. And that's really difficult. It's really difficult for parents to hold that. So yeah, we don't have this healthy model of what that's like. So we get triggered, and then we end up reacting often in exactly the same way that our parents reacted. So if you say to yourself, I can't remember how my parents reacted, a really good clue is, exactly what you're doing. Are you waggling the finger at them? Do you have that impulse to like slap them around the back of the legs? Are you shouting at them? Are you running and hiding, withdrawing from them? Whatever your reaction is, it's a pretty good bet that was something similar that your parents did as well.
Yeah, and I think one of my own fears too is I have experienced what it has felt like to not have the full range of emotions and not be able to express. And so therefore, I was having all these emotions stored away in my body that I had to deal with later, many years later. And so I would love to be able to, I won't fully be able to spare my children from this, but I would love if they could express emotions in the moment so that they're not having to store that pain in their body somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. And you're exactly right, because that's what happens. Anger is a healthy normal emotion. If it's there to protect us and we react, and if something is threatening us, then it's very normal to react with anger, and that's okay. But whenever our children have big feelings, and we sort of we can't be with those feelings, and our children get that message and they suppress them, then it just gets pushed down, it gets pushed in, and it's going to come out at another time. And that's often, when kids have quite a lot of off-track behavior, those difficult feelings are popping up at other times throughout the day, or in the supermarket, or at the most inconvenient time. These big feelings are popping out and causing difficulty. So if we can actually be with our children's big emotions in the moment, if we can try and stay centered, a really good place to start is even just noticing what comes up for you instead of reacting straight away, is maybe just even noticing what comes up for you when your child is expressing big emotions, and sitting with that and noticing it, and then also trying to hold your child's emotions, trying to allow that outburst, and just to listen from a centered place, and listen through their upset, offering your warmth, offering your connection to your child. And that's one of our hand-in-hand tools, which we call stay listening, which is very much just staying with our child through their big emotions and listening. And whenever we are their emotional anchor, we help to regulate them, so they feel safe to express. Their nervous systems are sort of very much in tune with ours. And whenever we're able to stay calm, then they're able to offload these big, messy feelings. And, and that's a healing process, because instead of pushing them down and storing them in their body, they're expressing them and getting them out. And you'll often notice, if you listen through a child's upset, that at the other end of it, they come out feeling, and it can be big and wild and long and sweaty and, and messy. But when you get out the other side of it, often your child will be relaxed. They'll be relaxed in their body. They'll be cooperative. They'll be, they'll be very loving towards you. They might sleep better. So you might notice there's a big change in them when they can offload those big feelings and come back. And what's happening there is that they're offloading, and then they're able to feel your warm connection again. And then their brain is working, all the cogs are turning as they should be, and they're able to act from this sort of connected place where they're back to their loving little selves.
And I know we talked about this in our first episode together, which is that when children unload those emotions, usually it means that they feel safe in the presence of who they're unloading them to. So that is something that is a bit of a relief to parents, I think, even if they have a hard time holding space and staying centered during that expression of emotion. At least they can maybe have a bit of comfort in knowing that your child feels safe in your company to do this. Is that something that you would agree with?
Oh, yes, so much. And so many parents say to me, I'm the only person that they behave so badly with, that they come home from school and they're like, bah! And, they feel safe enough. So for me, that's like, I know it's hard, but for me, that's like such a huge honor, such a huge, it's a huge thing that you are the person your child feels emotionally safe enough with, and they feel emotionally safe enough to express all that stuff. And as they grow older, if you can hold that and you can listen to that, as they grow older, they'll be able to share, they feel safe sharing with you. As they become a teenager, they'll be able to share their upsets. They'll be able to share the things that are difficult. I think if you don't listen to those small things, if you don't listen to those small upsets whenever they're young, then they won't bring you the big things whenever they get older.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the things that helps to keep me on track if I'm starting to feel off track with emotions, is be able to see down the road a few years and feeling like, I want my teenage children to be able to come to me. I want to maintain that closeness and that relationship with them, so that if I can be of help, even if it is just a listening ear, that I'm at least one person that they come to for that. I did want to ask you, though, something that I see often is distraction being used whenever children are emotional or they're expressing a lot of emotions. So can you talk about what happens when parents or caregivers use distraction as a means to cope with emotions?
Yeah, so I guess, like a prime example of that is, if you're in the toddler groups and you see, a toddler falls and hurts themselves, and, straight away the caregiver might be like, reaching for a toy and shaking a toy and, oh, look at this and like really, using a different toy to distract them from their feelings. But what you can do instead is to just be with your child. If your child falls and hurts themselves, you can go over and offer your connection. So you get down to their level. Oh, you hurt yourself. I'm here with you. Ouch, that's sore. And stay with them while they cry. And they won't cry for more than a few minutes, and then, you've listened through that hurt and it doesn't get lodged in their system. Because if we distract a lot from big feelings, then our children learn that as a coping mechanism. And as they get older, they will use distraction very much to cope with their emotions. So that's a sort of a template you're laying down. But I would say as well that it's not always convenient, or is not always able, or you might always feel centered enough to listen to your child. And if that's the case, it's completely fine. If you need to distract them, if you're in the supermarket and they're having a meltdown, and or a meltdown is just beginning, and there's an old lady telling you what to do, and if you need to use distraction, absolutely fine if it gets you out of there. But I think that it's good if you're if you can, wherever possible, if the time and space allows, is to listen to those feelings instead of distracting from them.
Yeah. I have two questions, and they kind of you can answer one and then the other, but one question is, can children regulate themselves, or do they need us to help them regulate? And is there such a thing as a tantrum? Does that exist, or are we mislabeling something else?
Okay, so, well, tantrum, yes, absolutely. Tantrums exist, yeah. And yes, they are real, and but they serve a purpose. That's the really important thing to remember, that they serve a purpose, that it is our child's way of healing. It's our child's way of getting all that upset out instead of storing it in their nervous system. So they're really, like, children are so smart. They are very in tune with what they need to heal. So especially if things have been difficult for them, that they might have these huge tantrums, and it's a way of them getting those big feelings out of their bodies. So tantrums are definitely real, and they should be welcomed, embraced, encouraged. If we are feeling centered, we can listen to them, and we can acknowledge, yes, our child is offloading, they're healing, they're doing the good work they need. We need to be their emotional anchor, and that's absolutely okay. So, and then that leads on to the regulation, co-regulation thing, that, you know, our children in that moment, they do need our help, and they need to feel our nervous system. They need to feel us as their emotional anchor in those moments. And no, children can't regulate on their own. I don't think adults can either. I don't think, you know, we are such social beings that, you know, like there's research done that, you know, if you walk, you know, if you're on your own, your nervous system is different, and that's why loneliness is such a big concern. And as soon as somebody else walks into a room, your heart rate changes, your breathing changes, your stress hormones change. So we very much are in connection with each other, and we need each other to you know, to help us regulate our nervous systems and our immune systems. And so I think that children do need our help. They do need our help to regulate. And even from, you know, a newborn baby, being close to you helps to regulate their heart and their breathing and their temperature, and, you know, all that lovely skin to skin. That's why it's so important. And, you know, children need us to be their emotional anchor as they move through the early years, and even, you know, all the way through teenage years. If they have you there as their anchor, and been able to keep calm amidst that storm and keep centered, then you know, they will pick up on that, and that's gonna really help them to regulate as well.
Yeah. I have to say, in relation to tantrums, my children have inspired me to feel all the feelings in the moment that I'm feeling them, and to actually express it, and not be afraid of expressing it when they're present, because I feel like it allows the acceptance of the emotions. But I'm able to move through things so much more quickly than I ever have in my life, because I'm giving myself the freedom to not be wrong in my feelings, to feel them, to move through them, and to just let them go. But I have my children to thank for that. That's been a wonderful difference in my life since having children. And I'm wondering, for parents who feel like they are incapable of being present for their children, they're incapable of being around to be that safe, centered space when their children are feeling big emotions, what are some recommendations or tips that you have to offer?
Yeah, so I mean, and listen, none of us can be, you know, 100% present, 100%, you know, zen around our children, because they do trigger us all the time, many times a day, and that's really normal. So yeah, we can't expect to be able to be present for our kids all the time. But, you know, I suppose if very often that we're struggling, like very often we're getting triggered like many times a day, which is, you know, which is where I used to be when my son was born and my second child was born. I suddenly was in this state where I was getting triggered many times a day by my daughter, and I was really struggling. So I think that you know, and there's a lot that we can do. And in hand parenting, we have one of the 5 tools that we talk about is the listening partnerships for parents. And that is so that's like a proactive way to really work on those triggers, the things that are triggering you, the things that really set you off. So what you can do is you start noticing the things that are really hard in parenting, and notice the things your children do that trigger you. And what we do is we we help people pair up with another parent, and we exchange listening time. So say I would listen to you for 10 minutes about how hard things were. You can also talk about how wonderful things are, but you can often parents will talk about how difficult things are in the moment when they're losing it with their child. So you talk for 10 minutes and I listen, and then I talk for 10 minutes and you listen. And whenever you start to do that regularly, a real sense of trust builds between the two partners, and you can really start to get to those difficult feelings that are underneath and those root causes of why you're getting triggered. And it helps sort of diffuse the energy that, that rage and that energy that comes out whenever you're triggered. It really just helps to soften that and diffuse it and heal it, so that you can, and it also ups your capacity so that you can really listen to your children and be more present with them, that you're more emotionally available to them. So that's one of the core hand-in-hand tools, is really to support parents, because we're very much under supported, and we need that emotional support on a weekly, sometimes on a daily basis. We need that kind of emotional support.
Absolutely. And what are some resources that might be available to parents who feel like, we're just going to go here because it is the anger and the aggression episode, but for parents who feel like maybe they're a safety risk, like they don't want to physically harm their child, or they don't feel like they have the coping skills to be a safe person around their children. So what is accessible or available to them? What can they do to become a safer person to be around with their children?
Well, I mean, a great place to start is with listening partnerships. That's available to all parents, and you can on the Hand in Hand website, there's information about that. There's the Facebook groups where people can reach out and find other parents that are looking for listening partners. I suppose though, in the moment, maybe if parents are really, really struggling, you can, as soon as you notice that you're getting triggered, is you can, I mean, it can help quite a lot, is that, you can explain to your kids even beforehand, is, when sometimes when mummy gets angry, I'm going to go into the room and just need a few minutes to myself, and you can like scream into a pillow, or you can like have a kid's baseball bat at hand and like pummel the bed for a few minutes, or even going into the bathroom and like wringing a towel. You can do those kind of things in the moment. You can do things to try and keep you grounded, taking a drink of water, going out, getting fresh air, putting on some music and like jumping and stomping around. You can also, another hand-in-hand trick is just to lie on the floor, is just to tell your kids, I give up being a parent right now, and like get down on the floor, lie flat down, pummel the floor with your fists, and more than likely your kids will come over and start giggling and start climbing over you, and it can really diffuse the tension. So there are things that you can do in the moment to try and diffuse the tension that's building up. But I find that, that's all well and good, but you really need to take the proactive approach of getting to those big feelings, your own big feelings that are underneath, and that are getting triggered over and over again. And until you empty that out. In Hand in Hand, we talk about this emotional backpack. So you're walking around with this emotional backpack stuffed full of all these feelings that were never expressed, and some of us have a fuller backpack than others, and unless you can start emptying some of that stuff out, then it's going to keep coming up. It's going to keep coming up in your parenting.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I just know that definitely during the lockdown, there's been, like, people have talked about how there's probably a rise in family violence, but yet no one's there to see it. And it's not to say that those parents that are struggling don't want the help, or they don't want to be a safer parent, but maybe they just don't know the resources. So I wanted to make sure I asked that. What is the hand-in-hand parenting stance on if your child is upset, but you need to do things like get them in a car seat, or ensure that they're walking safely down a busy street or something like that? What's the hand-in-hand parenting approach to those moments?
Yeah, so I think that, there's certain things we have to do as parents, that we have to get our kids to comply sometimes, and they might not want to. So I mean, I think things like crossing the road, or safety type things, when you have to keep them safe, hold their hand, or that comes first. Sometimes you have to overpower them if they're making a beeline out of the playground and straight to a busy road, you know, you have to physically grab them and keep them safe. So I think that's really important. But there's other things that, you know, other things like that, you know, say getting in a car seat, less urgent, but things that are really necessary as well. Our children can have big reactions to that, and they can have these big aggressive, you know, outpouring of emotion whenever we want them to do these things. So I think that, say if we take the example of the car seat, I suppose that it's good to try this not when you're on the school run and you need to be at the school gates in 5 minutes, but you know, if your child is having a hard time with the car seat, you can really, they have to get in the car seat. It's something that just has to be done. And but you can maybe set it up at a time when you're not really in any rush to go anywhere, and you can take that time to listen to their big feelings about it. So you can very much insist that yes, you have to get into the car seat, but you're offering your warm attention, and you're offering your understanding. You get that it's hard for them. There's something going on there that is hard. And you know, it could be a control thing, that, you know, when kids don't have very much control in their lives. So whenever there's something that they can exert control over you, then sometimes that's very attractive to them. So that's things like teeth brushing, eating food, going to the toilet, car seat. It's all those things where it's really, you know, it's very hard. You can't force them. Sometimes you can't force them to open their mouth, or can't force them to sit in the car seat. So that's very attractive to children, because they spend so much time with us telling them what to do. But if we have the time, we can really you know, insist that they get in the car seat, but take it really slowly, you know, suggest it in the house, you know, we're going to get in the car seat now. And if any big feelings come up, to really listen at that stage. Maybe the feelings won't come up until you've opened the car door and they don't want to get in. And you can listen then, you can listen to their upset about it. And you can just take it that one step at a time, keep proposing the next step, that what you're going to do. Now we're going to get into the car, now we're going to put the straps on. And really always the goal is offering your connection as much as possible and listening to whatever big feelings come up. Another great strategy that works really well is play, is bringing play into the equation. So, you know, so children can offload any fears that they have, light fears, they can offload through laughter. So if you can encourage lots of laughter around certain areas, then that can really help them get over some of their fears, and really help to build cooperation and build connection with them as well, which is great. So something with the car seat, you could maybe get a teddy, and you could be out there in the car, and you could be putting the teddy into the car seat, and the teddy's speaking with a funny voice going, "No, I'm not getting in there," and then like bopping you on the head or something. And if that makes your child laugh, just go with it, like keep doing it over and over again. And that will really help those giggles will really help your child offload those fears that they have, or that reluctance to sit in the car seat. So that's another great strategy as well.
You mentioned control. I'm wondering, are there ways that we can work in throughout the day to give our children a greater sense of control over their lives, their choices, and what they're doing throughout the day?
Yes, definitely. So I think the best tool that Hand in Hand has for this is what we call special time. And special time is whenever we set a timer for a short amount of time. It's 10 or 15 minutes. And for that 10 or 15 minutes, our child is 100% in control. We do whatever they want to do. Now, obviously, not jumping out the second story window, or, you know, we do want to keep them safe. But, you know, really you try and give them full control. And it's only you can even do it for shorter, you can even do it for 5 minutes. And you just say to them, and announce it and say, "Oh, we're going to have special time. You can do whatever you want." And usually, you know, sometimes they just want to play, and then they'll test the boundaries. I had a client recently whose son, once he got the hang of special time, he started setting fire to things, and she set it up so that he could do it in a safe way. But this was something that he was really obsessed with, and she made sure it was in a safe way. And you know, he was just absolutely loving that. So they will test your boundaries of that. But it is a real way to give our children a sense of control, that they are in charge for that 10 or 15 minutes. And all we do is we play along and make sure everything's safe, of course, but give our child our full attention, or pour in all our warmth and love and attention. They're the center of everything for that 10 or 15 minutes. And that gives our children such a sense of control, and it allows them to work through difficulties that they are having around power struggles and control as well. I remember my daughter, who, whenever she started nursery school, and all our special times where she was bossing me around, telling me the rules and like reading out rules and making me sit in certain places. And she was working through all these rules that were in the classroom that she couldn't quite make sense of. So I was giving her that control to play through whatever issues were coming up for her. So that is a really great, simple, easy way that you can give your child full control for a little bit of time.
And you might be so surprised at what actually comes out, because what I find with special time is, so sometimes we get upset and we don't even know what it's linked to. And the same thing I find happens to our children. Like sometimes they're upset and it's about something that happened, maybe a few hours before or something, and they're not making the link or we're not making the link. But in special time, sometimes it just comes out and the link is made and they're able to tell you, or they're able to play what it was that caused it. And all of a sudden, we as parents get insight, and all of a sudden their emotions make so much sense. And I find, maybe it's just me, but not that there has to be a reason, but to me, if I can link a reason for the big emotions, it makes me so much more understanding and patient. And if I need to make amends, I can make amends in those moments. But to me, it's like I'm able to make sense of it so much more than if it's just an emotional outburst that I'm really not sure where it came from. Mm-hmm. So that's been one of my benefits to special time.
Great. And we don't always know, I guess. And I think actually an important thing whenever we're talking about anger as well is to say that often we don't know where these big feelings are coming from. But very often, children that have a lot of anger, that are expressing like a lot of aggression, maybe they're hitting children in the playground, maybe they're hitting you a lot, or they're a sibling, or biting, these biting behaviors, kicking, and which could be really, really difficult for parents to deal with. And you really often, parents feel like they've failed as a parent, and the other parents are judging them, and it's a really hard situation to be. But what our understanding hand in hand is that underneath aggression is always fear. So the aggression and the anger is covering up this underlying fear. And this fear has been lodged into our children's system at some point earlier in their life. And there's many scary things, all children experience things that are scary when they're so tiny, and, the whole world is scary for them. But often children that have a lot of aggression are the ones that have maybe had a difficult time earlier in their life. It's something really frightening has happened to them. And that could be an early separation from their parents, when they were left alone and were afraid. It could be early medical procedures. It could be a very difficult birth. Because our children's emotional brains are completely they're completely developed from even before birth. So whenever our children go through birth, it's actually a very frightening experience for them, and especially if it's been a difficult birth. So and we often see that it's those children who have had a hard time, that they were very much overwhelmed. They weren't able to fight back in the moment, and so they had to sort of just be passive and had to sort of sit back, and they were just very much overwhelmed by the fear that it's often those children who have a lot of aggression, as they enter toddlerhood and into preschool and that kind of thing. So they can have a lot of aggression, which can be very difficult to manage. And it's something that it does take a lot of work to help them with that. And it can be very, very messy and very, very aggressive. There could be a lot coming out there. And one of the best ways to deal with that is actually, number one, is listening through those big feelings and listening through that anger. And really, what we're trying to do is reach our child through that anger, reach them with our connection and our warmth. And the second thing is special time. So I've talked about special time already, but it really helps children process that sense of whatever the fearful event was. It helps them work through it, and because that's how children make sense of things. So I think it's really important just to mention that. Another thing that will really help those children that are have a lot of aggression is physical play. And some people might say, you know, you're rewarding this aggressive behavior, but you know, if your child has been aggressive, they're signaling that they need our help and they need our connection. And a great way to do that is through physical play. And you can get really physical with your kids, like doing something like family wrestling, that can really help them. And I mean, it's not like it's not like a free for all. There's rules, and you know, you can't hurt each other, so you can't kick people in the face, you can't bite them. So you need to be proactively enforcing those rules if your child is getting too aggressive. But if you can really meet them with their energy and really wrestle with them, and of course you're going to let them win, you're going to let them overpower you, but they have to fight for it. And that can be a great way for it to help kids have that sense of agency over themselves, that they can fight back, because there was times in their lives when they couldn't fight back, and now they're fighting you in a wrestle, and they're working hard, and they're winning. So that can be a hugely empowering thing for children, and can really, really help with aggression. I think parents are sometimes afraid to get very physical with children that are quite exuberant and aggressive, because they think it's going to encourage it. But it's really the opposite is true. If you give them that outlet for it, in a safe way, and you need to be enforcing the rules. If they are starting to really kick and really sort of trying to hurt you, and you can tell very quickly whenever they start to go off track and it's like proper aggression coming in, then you need to set the limit there and really stop that behavior. That could trigger quite a big outburst from them, but that's all good. If you can listen through that, then they're taking that opportunity to shed those big emotions that are associated with the fear, which is causing the aggression. So it all sort of ties into each other. So that's such a powerful thing that you can do.
We had a question come in through Instagram, and I think it's a good one, particularly because we're coming out of lockdown. We've been at home a lot, and we might be returning to playgrounds or other areas where children are around other children. And the question was around, you know, how do I talk to my 3-year-old about the fact that some children experience more anger or frustration than others, and to not encourage the 3-year-old to also mirror or act out it. That's what her question was. So yeah, do you want to answer that one for us? Or she was talking about not copying the
that the child wouldn't sort of pick up that behavior off another aggressive, a child that's been aggressive in the playground.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that children, we can explain things to children. Like as adults, we talk, we do a lot of talking, and that's our main means of communication, I suppose. But for children, I love that, and I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, the Charlie Brown cartoon where the teacher, the voice of the teacher is always what, and that's what they are hearing. And I think for children, it's good to remember that whenever we sit them down and give them a big talk, like they're just hearing what, like it doesn't go in. So explaining is probably one of the less effective ways to reach our children. And children actually know that. Children have heard it. If they've heard you say it once, I'm sure they've heard it 30 times that hands are not for hitting, and they've heard it all before. So what I would go back to is that understanding, the hand-in-hand understanding around connection, that whenever our children are feeling connected to us, and whenever their brains are on track and they are everything's working well, then they know that hitting is wrong. They don't want to hit each other. They want to be friends with their classmates, and they don't want to hit. So I think that having that understanding, that then it's not possible that a child would sort of pick up this behavior, this kind of aggressive behavior. If they are feeling well regulated, and if they're feeling connected and they're feeling happy, then they're not going to copy that kind of behavior. And I think it might be helpful. I mean, you can certainly talk about it a little bit, and say, sometimes we all get big feelings that we struggle with, and just to be curious with him and go, you know, what do you think is going on for him? And it'll be amazing what kids will say, because they're obviously often very in tune, and they'll say, oh, maybe he's having a hard time, or maybe he doesn't like school, or maybe he doesn't like this or that. You know, kids will have a very good sense of why a child might be acting out like that. So I wouldn't be concerned that it's sort of a contagious thing. Children learn most through modeling, and if we're modeling behavior that is respectful, if we're respectful to them and respectful to other children and other adults in our lives, then that's how our children are going to learn, really through modeling and doing what they see us doing. So I think that's the best way, is that our interactions with our children are gentle and respectful, and also with other adults, and then our children are really going to mirror that, rather than to mirror the behavior in the playground.
I love that. And it kind of, before we go into the play aspect of things, I did want to ask around, you know, where you're talking about understanding why and asking, you know, well, why do you think? I think that's such a beautiful approach. Instead of us having to name or constantly have an answer, it's nice to give them the opportunity to come up with some answers or possibilities as well. My question is around children who have ADHD or autism, or maybe have some challenges that are quite frustrating, or that have them acting in a way that is maybe not in alignment with what society expects as the norm. Can you speak to that before we move on to the play aspect?
Yeah, and I suppose it's very misunderstood, and I think society at large is quite intolerant of children at the best of times, and then is even less tolerant maybe when there's a child who struggles in a busy environment or with lots of sensory inputs, and might really struggle with that. So I suppose, but what I would say is that you know, children that have ADHD or are autistic, you know, there's such a I suppose there's such a wide variety of needs and like neurodiversity there, and parents tend to know best what their children need. But with hand-in-hand parenting, it doesn't matter if your child has autism or ADHD or is neurotypical or whatever. It comes back to the same connection-based approach, that, you know, whenever our number one goal is connection, and listening to feelings, and doing that with as much compassion as we can, and really trying to stay connected with our children and building that relationship with them, then you know, that's going to be that's the most helpful thing, and that's the most helpful way of looking at children's behavior, is not through this lens of good and bad, but through this lens of connected or disconnected, and that they're feeling off track whenever their behavior becomes challenging for us. So I think that the tools are very, and the hand-in-hand approach is very relevant to, you know, neurodiverse, or the full range of children. So
thank you for that. Okay, so let's move into the play side of things, because you had mentioned it a little bit there when you're talking about like the family wrestling and parents having fear about what that might encourage rough behavior or violent behavior. So can we talk about play then?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so and you know, whenever we were talking before planning this, we you know, you had said about, you know, parents maybe being concerned when children have maybe gunplay or play around, you know, being the bad guy, or, you know, all this sort of stuff. So I think, like, I mean, my thoughts on that are that often we have big feelings attached to that. Often we have big fears around guns, and, you know, children playing with guns, and sometimes that's, you know, for some people they don't, that's fine, they're okay with that, but for many parents they find that difficult and challenging, and they you know, maybe start out saying, you know, my child's not going to play with guns, and then you find that they're obsessed with guns, and then you find that they you know, you're hiding guns or not letting them play with it, and then they're using a stick outside, or they're using their fingers or whatever. So I think that's, I mean, I suppose I think it's first good to notice our own reaction to it, that we're having a big reaction, and maybe to be curious about that reaction and where that's coming from, why we have this real tight spot around that. And that's a great place where the listening partnerships that I talked about, that's a great use of your time, is to explore those difficulties and where those difficulties are coming from, and really get into why, you know, why our kids playing with guns really upsets us. So that can be really, really helpful. And I think though that, I mean, I think gunplay, I don't think there's any evidence that it's not about the violence. Gunplay is not about violence. It's really about that power game, power reversal game, you know, that, and our children are, you know, if we are playing with our kids and they're, you know, shooting us and they want to get us, and, you know, that's very much, you know, it's like the chase and the excitement, and it's not really about violence. It's not so much about violence. And children can have huge amounts of fun with these things. So I think that, and, you know, each parent has their own level of comfort about that. So I think it's just good to be curious about it, and to know that, you know, if your kids play with guns, they're not going to turn into some crazed, I don't know, sociopaths.
That is, like, Pamela, you're speaking to me so personally without even knowing it. And I'll be completely open and vulnerable in this moment and share. But my life before Ireland, I worked with incarcerated individuals, both while incarcerated and once released. And I had an episode where the person intimated that he had committed a crime right beside where I lived. And I never knew if it was because he actually knew where I lived or if it was some coincidence, but it felt threatening to me. And I was a legal gun owner. So I slept with a 9mm beside my bed and had an escape plan and all the things. Mm-hmm. So for me, having a gun is so attached to fear of safety, and also attached to the violence that I witnessed whenever I was working with incarcerated individuals. So for me, I'm so hugely triggered when my son, just out of fun, is like playing, and I'm at this place where I'm like, I don't want to have a gun anymore. I don't want to have that need to feel safe through having a gun. I want to express family values around that, but I don't want to shame him for the fun that he's having in playing. So I just don't know where to go with this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's amazing that you have that insight, that your past experiences are very much influencing how you're feeling in the moment there. And, you know, kids are just being kids. I think kids the world over play with guns, you know, gunplay. It's like, you know, I'm getting you, like, you know, and it's very much, so I think it's really normal behavior. And like I said, it's not about violence. They are using play to explore those, you know, to explore those themes around hiding and catching and chasing and separation and power, and it's about all those things. And kids are very smart. They'll play what they need to play to work through whatever stage of development they're in. So I think that, and it's very far removed from violence. And I mean, the way children learn is through that modeling, is through, you know, if you are like a non-violent parent, and if you're peaceful and respectful, then your child is not going to learn violence through playing with guns. And probably, I mean, you've worked with incarcerated individuals that probably most of them, all of them, I would say, have a history of extreme childhood trauma, probably, where there was a lot of emotional neglect, emotional abuse, physical neglect, those kind of things, that they probably experienced a lot of difficulty in their early lives, and that is what leads to difficulties and violence later in life, not playing with guns or playing sort of that kind of war games or whatever. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and you know, to notice what's going on for you. And that's where the Listen partnerships can be so helpful, of just like talking about those things, talk about your fears, and, you know, be able to express all of that. I mean, some people use journaling as well, which can be helpful too. And, you know, and yeah, to be aware of that shame as well, that we can shame our children if we are telling them that they can't play that. I mean, for them, it's completely innocent. And then you're telling them, they pick up on your like anxiety about it, and then they think, oh, there's something wrong with me for liking this, and there is shame involved in that. I think another little you know, a good way around it that you can do is like, if your kids want to play that kind of thing, is you can and this is more for you than the kids probably, but you know, you can say to them, you know, oh, if you get me, I'm going to give you a big, it's a love gun, and I'm going to give you a big cuddle. So like they get you and you're like, oh, I'm going to have to come and cuddle you, and then you come over and cuddle them. So that can be a really helpful.
I like that much better. And I have to say, like, I've told my husband this too. I'm like, my reaction is so much worse than his play, as in like my reaction and how I feel about it. It's so much worse than anything that he's doing through playing and emulating, you know, having a gun. But I just haven't known where to go with this, or like how to let it guide me through having conversations. Like you said, you know, we rely on speech so much, and I would like to one day be able to open up the discussion around why I have those big feelings, but I'm just not sure how or when is appropriate, you know, to do that and bring that up.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I think it's reassuring to know that your children inherently know that violence is wrong, and you know, so it's something, it's going back to that, you know, those core beliefs of hand in hand, that we don't need to, you know, we don't need to teach them that so much, that they really get it. Like children are, you know, they are so caring towards the others in their, you know, their peers and their family, whenever they're feeling connected and everything's running smoothly. They're very kind and very gentle, and they know all these things. So I mean, it's not something that I think we teach much more through how we are with them, and that's the important thing. And then obviously, yes, when they get a bit older, and you'll know every child is different, whenever they get a bit older, and you feel comfortable talking about, you know, violence or guns, or something might come up that they see it on the TV, or they hear something in the news, and you know, you can have those discussions with them in a sort of an age appropriate way, but you can kind of rest assured that, you know, you don't really need to teach them this stuff, that they're going to get it through your modeling and through your you know, how you interact with how your family interacts in a gentle way. So that's enough.
What is your take on gift giving when it comes to things like family members or friends gifting things like guns or sock and boppers, or something that is a bit more physical or violent related?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, we're all in a different place. I suppose you have your experiences, so and that's coloring how you want your family to be, and you're entitled to you know, to make those choices for your family as well, if that's, you know, if that's what is really right for you. So I mean, and some people be very laid back about it and say, you know, it doesn't bother me whatsoever. So and that's okay as well. So I think it's you know, it's about being respectful for where everybody is on their journey. There's no right or wrong, and we're all very different in our family values and how we want to do things with our families. And if it is a strong value of yours that you don't want those type of things, I mean, you can talk to your family members and say, look, this is important to me. You know, this is, you know, I don't want those, I don't want you to get those kind of presents. And you can have, you know, have those difficult conversations if you know, that's really holding your own boundary around what is acceptable for your family. And it can be difficult because often most of the toys that get bought for your kids are, you know, from, not from you, it's like often from family members, and you know, they may not be in line with your family values. So that's okay, but you may have to have those tricky conversations about it.
What about things like children acting out stealing or being a villain or a bad guy of some sort? Like, should parents play along with them? Should they say, oh, I don't really feel like playing stealing? Like, how do you navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that children are so smart, and if they're playing that kind of thing, they are working on something. And I think that we should really trust our kids that they are working on. So, you know, if say if it's around stealing, and they want to be a robber, they're working on something. Maybe they've watched something, maybe they've heard something, maybe they've seen something, and I think we should really trust our children that they are going to work through what they need to. So I would be fully supportive if they want to do that kind of play. They're not going to, you know, they're not going to grow up to be like cat burglars or anything.
Well,
You know?
It's like funny because I think back to like playing Zorro with my cousins and all of those types of things. And
Mm.
when I think of myself as a child, I in no way think of harm or actually having any, ill intent. It's only when you're an adult and perhaps you've experienced difficult things that you project that, I think, back onto kids.
Yeah. And I would say though, like if they are wanting to play, if you can bring sort of laughter and giggles into it, and sort of also if you can be the less powerful one in the play dynamic, which often brings in a lot of laughter, then that can be really helpful to help our kids process whatever they're processing. So like say if you're playing robbers, like you can be the really rubbish robber that keeps bumping into things and keeps getting caught, and oh no, here come the police, oh, and like this, if you can bring that in, then you're bringing a real quality to the play where you're the less powerful one, and that gives your child a sense of control, and that can be really, really helpful to help them process whatever it is that's going on. We often don't know what they're processing, but I would really encourage those kinds of play. And and like I said, trust that your kids know right from wrong, and they know that stealing is wrong. And maybe there was something that happened in school, and they're trying to, with one child pinching another child's pencil, and somebody got in trouble, and maybe they're trying to work through that. So we don't really know, but I think we can really trust them on that.
Are there any other areas with play that you feel are important to talk about with regards to violence or anger or aggression?
I think, I think, no, just that play is such an important element of our children's way of learning and processing, that we should really trust them on it. And just the importance of that physical kind of play. And if you go onto the Hand in Hand website, there's lots of ideas for physical play with our kids. And the other thing about play is that often when our children's behavior is off track, if they're expressing anger or aggression frequently, then what they're really needing is our connection. So often at the first sign of that behavior, what can be really helpful is to give our kids the attention that they need in that moment. And a great way to do that is through play. And I think that's so often something that, is maybe counterintuitive for many parents, and saying, you're rewarding the bad behavior. But I think that if you have that understanding that children's behavior is off track because they need a sense of connection, and if you change I love changing the phrase attention seeking to connection seeking. If our children are signaling that they need connection through their off track behavior, if we are able to offer them that connection, if we even take 5 minutes of play with our children, whenever at the first sign that their behavior is going off track, then that can really get things back on track again. And it could mean that the rest of our day goes really, really well. So I think that's a really common misconception in parenting, that we can't reward that kind of behavior. But what it really is that our children need us and need our connection, and when we reconnect with them, then our day is going to go much better.
I thank you so much for that. The only last thing I can think of around this topic is just, you already mentioned about how kids are usually so in tune with other kids, but maybe is there a way that we can encourage them to recognize when perhaps they've hurt another child, or maybe they're doing something that another child is uncomfortable with, and having them understand those responses and act accordingly? Do you know what I mean? Like if they've hurt, or maybe the child isn't okay with the closeness of play or things like that, like what can we do as parents to encourage that everyone feels safe and respected?
Yeah, so I suppose, like, maybe I'm thinking of like a play date, and if a child, I suppose if two children are playing and one isn't comfortable with the amount of contact or whatever, I think it's really important to help kids with those boundaries. And there's a whole other conversation around consent and boundaries and things like that. But I think that sometimes we have to be right there to help our kids, because they are only little people and they can't navigate all this stuff on their own often. So if there is, especially maybe if you're having a play date and let's say it's your child maybe bites or hits quite easily, you're not doing them any credit or any justice, just leaving them in a room and going off and having your cup of tea, and then they're going to sort of, everything's going to kick off and it's going to end in tears. So I think it's difficult, but you need to be right there for those kids, so that you, at the first sign of their behavior going off track, that you can really step in there and enforce those boundaries. But you're not blaming anybody. That's the important thing. You're not apportioning blame. And you have this understanding that your child knows that it's not okay to push or shove or hit or the child that they're playing with, but they're having a hard time, and you're getting in there to help them. So you got to get in close and separate, keep everybody safe, and offer your connection to help them through whatever difficulty they're having. If two kids are playing and you get there too late and one's like clobbered the other and everybody's crying, I would never apportion blame on either kid. So it's about getting in, and what, like, my stock phrase for that is saying, I'm really sorry I didn't get here in time to help you. You're having a hard time. And you equally, you know that the child that's been hit is suffering, but the child that did the hitting is suffering as well, because children are doing their very best in the moment, and they've been struggling with some big feelings, and they've hit the child and they didn't want to do that, and it's upsetting for them as well. So it's about getting in there, keeping everybody safe, and saying, I'm sorry I wasn't here to help you, attending to the child that's hurt, and then also attending to the child that did the hitting, that you can actually offer them your connection and warmth, and not shaming them or punishing them, because and that's the times that they need our help most, whenever they are off track like that, and that will help them get back into their on track behavior and back into their cooperative, loving selves.
I love that so much. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you've said there. And I wonder, before we bring the episode to a close, is there any last words on this topic?
I suppose I just want to acknowledge again how difficult this is for parents to navigate, that often parents blame themselves for if their child has particularly aggressive behavior. So it's really just want to reiterate that this is really normal behavior. You haven't done anything wrong. You're not a bad parent. Your child is struggling with some big feelings, and there's lots of things you can do to support them through that, but it's certainly not your fault that this is happening. And I would so recommend, if what I've been talking about resonates with you, is having a look at the different tools, the hand-in-hand tools that you can use to really support your child with these big feelings, and you can do so in a very respectful and a gentle way that really supports your child's full range of emotions.
If people want to get in touch with you to learn more about hand-in-hand parenting, or to have a session with you, or to join some of your classes, where can they do that?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with me on my Facebook or my Instagram pages, or you can email me at PamelaQ@handinhandparenting.org. And I also would really recommend the Hand in Hand Parenting website, which is a great resource for people. But yes, you can drop me an email or get in touch on my social media pages, which I'm sure you're always very good at linking in there. They'll find me, and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much for this episode. It's made me feel much more at ease, and I'm so thankful for the time that you've set aside to chat with us again. So thank you, Pam.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed the show. Please feel free to leave a comment or a review to let us know what you loved about this episode and others like it. And if you'd like to be featured on our show, or if you know of someone who would be an amazing guest, get in touch with us at info@wellfedphotography.com and mention Living a Life Well Fed in the subject line.